were you born?
Oh, November 9.
Tell me your name.
November 9, 1920.
Sure, okay.
Gordon Zuverink.
Great, that's just for the record, so we can have
Okay.
it later on. What was your rank during your time in the South Pacific?
Staff Sergeant.
What year did you join the National Guard?
1939. After I got out of high school. Needed a few bucks, extra money, and that was a good way to get a few dollars to spend. And a couple of my buddies were in there, and so I joined the Guard, not knowing what was going to happen.
When you joined the 126th, did you understand the history of the 32nd Division at all? Have you heard anything about it?
No, just joined because it was a local National Guard.
Had you ever lived or traveled outside of the area, this West Michigan area, before that?
Not much. I doubt whether I was even out of the state. Traveled to the east side of the state, but as a teenager, drove in my jalopy. But no, I had not done any extensive travel. Of course, I was only 19 when I joined. I was 18 when I joined, not 19. I was 19 when we went overseas. I went to Louisiana.
Okay. How did Holland send all of you guys off?
Pardon?
How did Holland send you guys off? Was there any like dinners?
Oh,
parties?
there was a big parade downtown. We marched from the Armory down 8th Street to the depot, and thousands of people lined the streets and sent us off to meet the train.
Did you take any like good luck charms or mementos or anything special with you off to Louisiana?
No, I think just a photograph of my girlfriend, and that was about the extent of it.
All right. I'm going to ask you some questions about Louisiana now. Tell me about the typical day of training in Louisiana. What did you do?
Well, I was supply sergeant, so I didn't do a lot of field training. I did some shooting on the range. Of course, we all had to do that. But primarily, I was in charge of supply and had to make sure that we got the guys had the necessary clothing they needed, and like the cooks these days in camp. But I did get in whenever there was a review. Of course, I had to march in the review, and I was the guy that carried the guidon, what they call the guidon, the little flag.
What's the funniest thing you ever heard or saw in Louisiana?
I didn't see much funny about Louisiana, really. We had some funny things happen in our organization, but Louisiana, we did make a couple of trips to Baton Rouge and Alexandria, which was the town nearest us, but didn't get mixed up in the civilization of Louisiana, other than Sundays. We come from a religious group, and we'd go to church and Sunday evening, and we got to sing in a choir a few times, and so we were a little active that way in the local scenario.
Remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh yes.
Can you tell me about that?
It was a Sunday morning, and I had my wife was there, and my wife and I got married the summer before. So I was, my wife and I were at our little garage home that we shared with the first sergeant of my company, and we had heard what went on, that there was, that we had been attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, and we immediately went to the local gathering spot, the Schlitz Canteen, just outside of Camp Livingston, and that's where everybody talked and watched and decided tried to decide what was going to happen to us at that time. I could almost name the guys that were there. my first sergeant and a few of the other guys that were out of camp for the weekend. That was just outside of Camp Livingston.
Do you think that your training prepared you for New Guinea, that you had in Louisiana?
It prepared me for war, but not for New Guinea. There was no training. There was no jungle training that we had up till that time. In fact, when we were in Australia, not even then where we always said the people that trained us for jungle warfare were the Japanese.
Very good. Can you describe the train trip over to California? What kind of accommodations, what kind of atmosphere was there?
Well, it was, well, from station to station, and I'm sure you'll hear this from other people, but every time the train stopped to feed us, we were fed along the way, of course. Some of the guys would go to the chow line, other ones would head to town and see if they could find the nearest bar to pick up a bottle. And there was a bit of alcohol consumed during the train ride across the country, and that was the longest trip any of us had had for a long time. We went from Fort Devens, of course, to San Francisco, and but it was exciting.
All right, I'm going to ask you some more questions now about the trip to the South Pacific. Can you tell me what ship you were on and how long did it take to get there?
Yeah, we were on the SS Lure Line. That was a converted pleasure liner, and I believe it took us 21 days to get there. Of course, the reason it took so long, I guess, is because most of the way we were zigzagging, and I was on gun duty and watching for periscopes, of course, and submarines and enemy ships. And I recall that a couple of days, the ship turned around and headed straight east. And I thought, well, maybe the war's been called off. Maybe we're going back. But from what I found later, apparently that there was some scare of some ships seen in the area, so it was a dodging maneuver, trying to get out of that area. And but we saw no other ships. We had I believe a 9-ship convoy until we reached Australia, of course.
Did you have King Neptune ceremony?
Oh yes.
Tell me about it.
Oh, that was rugged. I wasn't one of them we had representatives that would represent each of us to go through the thing, but the guy got messed up. I was glad I wasn't there because that I wasn't one of them, because the guys got messed up pretty good. And I believe I still have in my memorabilia my card that I'm whatever they call it, I've forgotten.
You're official.
Yep, I'm a member.
All right, good. Had you heard any rumors or reports about the Japanese or the fighting that was going on while you were on your way to the South Pacific?
No. No, there was some speculation on board ship, wondering where we were going to go. And of course the best rumor we had was we were going to Hawaii, which proved not to be true.
Wouldn't have been so bad if you had, though.
Right, right.
A lot better than what you ended up in.
Yeah.
All right, in Australia now. How did the Australians treat you Americans?
Wonderful. Oh, hospitality was great there. Yeah, we were the Yanks, of course. Some of them call us the bloody Yanks.
What was your reaction to the Australian soldiers that you saw coming back from New Guinea? Did you see any of these soldiers?
Oh yes, a few. not too many, because that was 1942, and there weren't many back there yet. There was occasionally we would run into a few when we'd get a leave and go to a local pub to drink a few beers. There'd usually be a couple of them in there, and they were very friendly to us, and we were impressed as they were gung ho. That's the way they were on the front line too. They were great fighters. We found out later in New Guinea, fighting alongside of them.
What's the best memory you have of Australia?
Pardon?
The best memory you have of Australia?
Well, my best memories of Australia after I got back there, because we didn't see much of it while we were there. We were in camp primarily, either in Sandy Creek down at Adelaide or up at Newcastle, Brisbane, in Camp Cable. So we didn't get out much at that time. It was only afterward that I really mixed with the civilian population after I got out of combat.
All right. I'm going to ask you some questions about New Guinea, Buna, and Ananda now. How and where did you land on New Guinea?
We landed at Port Moresby. And I might add, our first recognition that there was a war going on. There was a ship right alongside where we docked that was sunk by the Japanese. It was laying there in the water. A big Liberty ship, I think it was. So we knew the war became a reality then.
What were the native people like that were on New Guinea? Describe, like, physically, were they helpful? Did they have any strange customs?
Well, Port Moresby, of course, was somewhat civilized, and they wore regular clothes like anybody else does. But it was later on that we met the true Papuan native. But on Port Moresby, again, when we landed in Port Moresby, we were restricted. We stayed right at that bivouac area. And I was only at the bivouac area for a couple of days.
What kind of weaponry did you personally carry?
I carried a M1 rifle, which I changed a couple of times on the front line. I was the expert rifleman on our company, and I was the designated sniper. And I preferred other weapons to the M1 for my sniping duties. In fact, the best sniper's rifle I had was a captured Japanese sniper's rifle. That worked better than ours. It was more precise. It had a longer barrel, and you could shoot it better. But starting out, I had an M1 rifle.
What did you throw away out of your pack?
First one was we weren't on the trail half a day, and we threw the gas mask away. We didn't figure we'd be gassed.
What items that were in your pack were the most helpful to you?
My shelter half, the half of the pup tent, and of course a couple extra pair of socks that I had, which were gone pretty fast on this hike over the Owen Stanleys.
What was the Kappa trail like physically?
Well, it was very grueling, narrow, not a wide trail, not nearly as wide as the Kokoda Trail. The Kokoda Trail was one of the main trails going across New Guinea, but the Kappa Trail was a little-known trail, I understood from history that I had researched after the war. And It only went one way, two ways, up and back, and you couldn't stray from that trail. You couldn't get lost because somebody didn't lead me and say this way, because we just followed the trail and just kept going in a northeasterly direction.
How cold did it get in the Owen Stanley Mountains at night?
It didn't get cold. No, it's the rainforest, and it was quite warm. At the top of the mountain, when we really got into the rainforest, there it got a little bit chilly, but I don't ever remember being cold. Wet, yeah. In fact, perspiring. After a couple of days, we wore fatigues. It was our uniform, and the pant legs were pulling on my legs because they were wet. And I found that I cut them off, and that was much easier walking than having those pant legs dragging on my skin all the time. So it was much more comfortable.
Now, I know we talked about this a little bit before ahead of time, but maybe you can tell me a little bit about it again. The native teenager that helped you guys on the trip?
Oh, yes. We had an interpreter with us. Of course, we had some natives that were bears carrying some of the heavier equipment for us, but we did have this teenager, Carl Keela, who was an interpreter for our company. And I didn't get to know him very well. I knew of him and knew him a little bit as we were walking across. But when we got over the top of the high peak and on the other side of the mountain, I might add that we were supplied by dropping areas. That's the only way we could get food. And they said, when you get to a dropping area, they'd say, take whatever you want for 5 days or 4 days or whatever it is. And so it was up to us to carry our own food. But when we got over to the other side of the mountain, we saw native villages all along the way. But this particular native village was called Yari, Jaure. And I, being the supply sergeant for my unit, the first sergeant put me in charge of that dropping area. And left Carl Keela with us, the interpreter. And we had with us a two-man radio crew from the Signal Corps, and they stayed in a little hut with their radio on the side of the mountain, and they would inform us when a plane was scheduled to come over to drop supplies and food. And other than that, it was kind of fun. I don't know how long we were there, maybe 10 days, 2 weeks. We had to stay there until the rest of the battalion came through up the trail and picked up their supplies. We had tea and moldy bread and didn't have any socks or clothing or anything, just food and no ammunition. They didn't drop ammunition. We had to carry all that. But Carl and I got to be very friendly, and I'd never forgotten the kid. A young teenager. He had been educated in a mission and could speak good English and could converse in the various dialects of the natives. And he proved important to us when it came time when we received instructions that the last of the troops came through our dropping area. We had to pack up and leave and head for Buna. And so he commandeered the natives from the local village to pack up our supplies, and we took off down the Kappa trail again, heading for the front line.
When and where did your unit encounter the Japanese for the first time?
It was on the San Fernando Trail. Our company was posted on just short of a roadblock that the anti-tank battalion had established, and our company had to keep that line open so that they could get supplies back and forth to their unit. And he called it a listening post, just there to make sure that the Japanese didn't come through and cut off the anti-tank group that was up there. And not very exciting, but one evening I had just finished eating a delicious can of mutton, and I had my rifle laying across my knees and sitting on a big log that went out into the jungle. And I heard a rustling noise, and I looked around, and there a Japanese was just crawling up over the log, the other end of the log that I was sitting on. He was the wrong way. My gun is here, and you shoot like that. Like a dummy, I shot pheasants and things, and if it worked out, I'd shoot left-handed. No, I had to jump around and twist around, and by the time he saw me move, he jumped behind a bush just alongside that log. So I let one fly into that bush, and he let out a yelp, and he came crawling back across that log. And I thought, now I got you, and I had a beat on him. And he was going to be a dead Jap. Click. I had it jammed. My rifle had jammed. I had a cartridge jammed in the chamber. And you talk about a scared Dutchman. I was so scared. I thought, if he heard that click, he and I are going to go hand to hand. And that was evening at dusk. And that was the worst night I spent on the front line. The moon was shining when it got dark. I'm laying there waiting for these Japs to come back. And the moon was shining and casting shadows on the ground. And the whole Japanese army came right through my position, I imagined. I knew it was my imagination working on me. I couldn't get over it. That was the worst night I spent on the whole front line. Other than, well, worst night, but we had frontal attacks that were not fun at all. That was my first encounter with the Japanese. I guess I just winged him. I think I got him in the leg. It looked like he was dragging his leg when he went over the top of that log.
Do you remember who was the first casualty in your unit? And can you tell me about him?
I think it was Sergeant Dannenberg. And right after that it was Sergeant Fuller. Dannenberg was from Wisconsin, and Fuller was from Wayland or somewhere around here. I met his family. Relatives of his at one of our reunions. He had talked to me about him. I said, yes, I knew Steve. But Sergeant Dannenberg was the first one that was shot by a sniper. And he had crawled over to one of his members of his platoon, who was in a foxhole and had got hit by the sniper in the belly, and he was crying for help. And Sergeant Dannenberg crawled over there and was talking to him in the foxhole. Said, "We'll get you out of there, Boogie. We'll get you out of there." Bang! Right through his helmet, and Dannenberg was dead. And so we had to get him out of there, knowing that the sniper was still up there. Of course, when a sniper was in the area, we put all the machine guns and 50 caliber guns on any suspecting palm trees and just blaze the tops away to try to get whoever was around, because you couldn't see them up there. And but we couldn't leave Dannenberg lay there, so Harry Glatz and I said, "Harry, let's go in there, and I'll grab one leg, you grab the other, and drag him out of there." So we dashed up there, and he took a leg and dragged him out of there. And we eventually got Boogie out of there. I believe it was later on in the afternoon. So we apparently had gotten the sniper with the fire we put down. And then, of course, a couple of days later, Fuller got it. He was talking to standing on the edge of a foxhole, talking to a couple of his guys, members of his platoon. He must have had his hand up to his chin like this. And he got shot right through the hand and right in the throat. And it popped his throat wide open. And I thought, and go up there and get him out of there. So those were the two first to my counterparts, because I was a platoon sergeant. We don't need supply sergeants on the front line, so I was a platoon sergeant. And but we did have counterattacks and attacks that we went on that guys were shot, and I don't remember who they were. And in fact, the lieutenant was in one of our frontal attacks. My lieutenant, before we went on the attack, he said, "Stick by me, Zuverink. Stay right by me." So I did. We, at the signal, we got out of our foxholes and started screaming and howling and running. And suddenly I heard a bang behind me, and the lieutenant went down. We had overrun one of the Japanese in the ground and shot the lieutenant in the back. And of course, I grabbed a grenade and threw it down in the foxhole and took care of him. But those are the kind of things we had right on our frontal attacks. They were not fun. They were not fun. You'd run and scream like a banshee, and you couldn't really see anything. Just throw that out there and hope that you didn't get hit.
What about your cousin John Mantil?
Yeah, see, he was in Company D. Yeah, I went into Cannon Company back when the 126 was streamlined. So I transferred to Cannon Company, but I had heard just a day after John got hit that I was led to believe that he was with Ozzie Voss, who was a lieutenant. And Ozzie got wounded, and John was killed instantly. And I guess it was a mortar shell that got him. John and I were pretty close. We went on passes together when we were in Louisiana. John always told my wife, when after war was declared and we knew we were going, he told my wife, he said, "Don't worry about your husband, he's going to come back. He is a good shot and a good soldier." He said, "Me, I don't know." And my wife never forgot that.
Did your unit ever take any POWs at Buna or San Antonio?
No, none. I guess the motto was take no prisoners. Shoot before they get that close that you can take them as a prisoner. Of course, they were. I understand afterward that they were all worn out and quite emaciated. They had fought over the Dakota Trail and fought back again. But there were some replacements there that had not fought on the Dakota Trail. And speaking of the Kappa Trail and the Dakota Trail, the Japanese were reinforced when the Aussies were reinforced when the Japanese got within 35 miles of Port Moresby. If they'd have gotten to Port Moresby and taken that, the next stepping stone would be the mainland of Australia. So it was important that they be beaten back. So the Aussies started pushing them back down the Dakota Trail. And I often wondered, what on earth were we walking up that Dakota Kappa Trail for? Why did we have to walk to Buna when later on our other guys flew over? Well, I found out later that we were supposed to get behind the Japanese and cut off their supply lines. Well, the further we walked, the further the Aussies pushed the Japs back. And by the time we got to Buna, they were already back there. So that was our first encounter. I did see a couple of, 2 different times we saw Aussies coming off the front line. And how they got to the Kappa Trail, I don't know. But there were 3 or 4 of them, and in one particular time they were carrying a stretcher with one of their wounded fellows. And I remember I said, remembered in my autobiography, I said that they met us, and as they were coming by us, they said, Give 'em hell, Yanks.
Did you feel that you had a reputation to uphold, both as an American and as a member of the 32nd?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, we knew we were setting a precedent. We were the first American soldiers over there, and sure, we had to show them what American people were like. We had a reputation to uphold, sure.
Were you injured ever at Santa Ana, Buna, or on the trail?
No, never injured by enemy fire. No, got malaria fever, black water fever. Had two kinds of worms discovered when I got there: hookworm and wetworm. Jungle rot was the other than malaria. Jungle rot was the worst thing. A series of boils that were on both legs, and it just wouldn't heal up, just like boils and jungle rot, and that got a lot of the guys. That's it was a fungus, wet clothing. My wife says, "How often were you able to change your socks?" I said, "Well, I had one pair of socks. Only had one pair of underwear. And try to wash it out if we got near a stream, but that's about the extent of it. It'd get wet most of the time at night. It would rain almost every night. So we'd wake up wet in the morning, and just during the day it would dry off, and at night it'd get wet again. And we had no reporters with us, certainly no camera crew, but there were a few reporters that got to Buna, I guess, and one of them had made, you probably read it, that it was the worst bunch of looking American soldiers he had ever seen in his life. Circle eyes and skinny limbs, and of course after a couple of months walking on the trail, we were in pretty tough shape.
What happened to the unit's morale as they went over the trail, as you all went over the trail?
It wasn't good. It was pretty hard to keep upbeat. I keep mentioning Harry Glatz, a friend of mine from Holland. He and I were probably the best physical specimens. We didn't march. We walked as fast as we could. Harry and I always were out front. We always arrived at the bivouac area first, and it was, I don't know, looking back on it, kind of like a walk in the park. But some of the guys, they just couldn't take it. They were so exhausted, and the heels, walking in the mud and the roots, some of the heels would come off. Some lose the heels of their shoes, and it was very difficult walking, and couldn't get a new pair of shoes. And they complained that they couldn't walk anymore. Well, I guess my commanding officer, Captain Fenton, he kind of took offense at the fact that Harry and I were the first ones in camp every night, had our fire made and our rice cooked, and he said, Zuverink, he said, "You're going to bring up the rear tomorrow and push these guys. You're going to be the pusher tomorrow for a few days." I didn't like that at all, because some of the time I'm carrying 2 packs, and pushing the guys ahead of me, pushing them along. And those were the toughest days, my toughest days on the trail, trying to help someone else along. And after a few days of that, I told the captain, I said, "You can court-martial me if you want to, but if I'm going to get to the other side, I can't keep doing that. I want to get back out front where I belong." So he never said anything about it. He let it go with that.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So all those nights that you spent on the trail, and all the nights that you were at Buna and St. Ananda, what did you dream about the most? What did you have left to look forward to?
Well, I didn't do much dreaming because I didn't fall asleep until I was utterly exhausted. And of course, we could only sleep in shifts. The guy that was next to you was going to stay awake while you took a nap, and it was not a whole night's sleep. But I remember a couple of times waking up in the morning that I'm laying on the ground and pick a little high spot in the ground to lay on. In the morning you wake up and my hands and my feet are in the water. That wasn't there the night before. It rained so hard that the water would collect and then run off again. But there were not the best of accommodations there. Water, drinking water, if we weren't by a river, the only way we could get a canteen full of water was to dig a hole in the ground, and the water was probably a foot below there. Just dig a hole until we got to water and get all that mud out of there, and then wait for a half hour until all the foam and dirt would settle, and take a canteen cup and dip it in there and fill your canteen and put 2 iodine drops tablets in there, and that was fresh water. And that's the only way we get water, unless, like to say, if we come upon a river.
Now, you were telling us about how you woke up in the hospital, in the field hospital, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you go back to the hospital in Australia then, too?
Yes. I was carried from the front line and flown back from Buna area to Port Moresby, and went into the field hospital there, which was like a big circus tent. And I understand that I was there probably a week, small week maybe, in a semi-coma. And when I woke up, I was wondering where I was, and I had to ask where I was. But woke up in the evening, I remember, and I checked to see if all my limbs were there yet. And I raised one leg, and I thought, that can't be my leg. Skinny limb there. When I went in, when we went into New Guinea, I weighed close to 200 pounds. And at that hospital, I weighed 135 pounds. And when I was in that hospital until I was ambulatory, that I could walk to the plane, and then I was flown to Townsville. And we didn't have any seats or benches in the plane. We sat on the aluminum floor. And the vibration, when the plane landed, I couldn't walk. They had to carry me off the plane. This was at Townsville when we landed. So back into the hospital again, and I spent some time there. What I had was orchitis. That's affects the testicles. And couldn't walk, couldn't do anything. But I was there recuperating for about a week, and ambulatory well enough to go to get a pass to go to town and drink a couple of beers. And I walked to town and walked back. By the time I walked back, I was down again. I shouldn't have done that. So it was another few days. They finally gave up, and they put me on another plane and sent me back. No, I got better there. I healed up, and I got ambulatory, and I could get back to my company. So they flew me back to Brisbane and went back to Sandy Creek and joined my outfit again, Cannon Company was getting replacements from the States and rebuilding to a new strength again, and took over my job again as supply sergeant. And I don't know how long we were there, but I would go back and forth to the hospital with malaria. Malaria would throw me back and forth in the hospital. And finally they gave up on me and said, this guy can't do it anymore. So they flew me to Sydney, and I went to the 118th General Hospital in Sydney. And I was in that hospital for 9 months, trying to get over. They were trying to heal up my jungle rot, and get rid of the worms I had in my intestines and get over the recurrences of malaria and black water fever. And after 9 months, they discharged me and sent me to the replacement depot. And from there, I was reassigned to the 799th Military Police Battalion. And we were in charge of a stockade in Sydney. That was not a POW camp, a stockade. That was for our bad boys, the AWOLs and deserters. And if some of our guys would slip away from their outfit, and our guards would have to go pick them up and put them in the stockade until we could send them back to their unit. But that's primarily what I did in Sydney. I was in charge of I was supply sergeant for the stockade in the military police.
Was there quite a bit of AWOLs and
Oh yeah, lots of them. Our stockade was full. We had a couple of bad guys, I remember, that were not AWOLs, deserters, guys that just left their outfit. And those bad ones we sent to a prison called Round Mountain at Brisbane. And that's where the bad guys went. AWOLs, they were just out for a good time. We sent them back to their unit. But we had some occurrences in the stockade. I remember one time one of our bad ones was shot. He had escaped once before. His name was Bert. He was a baddie. He escaped once before, and we got him, put him back in again, and he was, sometime later, he was trying to climb the wall again, and the guard said, "Halt, halt, get back down off that fence." And halt, he kept climbing and shot him in the back, knocked him off the fence, and that was, and we had found that he came from a bad family. His mother was in prison over here on stateside, so he should have been let go for the good of the service. He was more trouble than good.
Do you remember when the decision was made to send you back here to the States? And what was that like?
We went on rotation points. You had to build up rotation points by time and combat service. And you reach a certain point, I forgot what they were, but they were in the hundreds. And I knew that I had enough points to go back to the States. And I just kept bugging my captain. I said, "When am I going back?" He said, "We need you here. You're important to this." And then he finally admitted, when I finally did get my traveling orders, he said, "We have inspection. You know we have inspection periodically." And he said, "I always get an A1 rating, and it's primarily because of the way you run a supply. And you're one of the reasons." And he said, "I can't let you go." I said, "Come on. A prisoner could do my work. A trustee could do my work." "No," he said, "you're important to me." I'll never forget that. He held me over, and I could have gone 2 months earlier. I had enough points to go. But, and I was, I think I mentioned before that I was married. When I left my wife pregnant, and my daughter, I found out, was born on September 12th, when I was in New Guinea, at Port Moresby. And I don't think I was on the trail at that time, but I did, at one of the dropping areas, we received some mail. It was dropped to us, and I received a V-mail saying that you had a daughter born on September 12th. And that's, so I was walking over the Owen Stanley Mountains, and that's the first I had found out that I was a father. And I never saw her until she was a couple months before her 3rd birthday. So I had something to come home to.
So was your wife here in town, or was she at a base?
No, she when we shipped out to Massachusetts, she came back to Holland, And she was working for the defense plant, Fafner defense plant in Holland. And she worked there all the time I was gone. And she lived with her mother and father, and her mother and father raised my daughter. And that was a bad thing when we decided to move out and take her with us. Because her grandfather and she were such buddies. She was mother and father to him, you know. And it was a pretty tough situation for her to get pulled out of that environment.
Were you awarded any medals or distinctions for service? And if so, what for?
If I earned any medals?
No, were you awarded any medals?
Yeah, the Bronze Star with 2 clusters, and that was the one special one. The rest of them were all, good conduct ribbon. Everybody got a good conduct ribbon unless they died in Stockade. But if you're a good guy, you got good conduct ribbon. And I had the expert rifleman's badge and combat infantry badge, which they all got if you were in combat infantry. And all the unit citations, of course. We had some presidential unit citations. I probably got a dozen medals that I was awarded. Some of them I didn't get until several years ago. I had to write for them because they weren't issued at the time that I was discharged. So, but yeah, if I had them on my chest, they'd cover a good share of the left side of my chest.
Remember how long it took you to get back home to Holland from the South Pacific?
Well, I don't know how long we were on board ship. Incidentally, we got on board ship in Brisbane. They sent us from Sydney to Brisbane to get on board ship, and guess what ship I got on? The Lure Line. Same one I went over on. I don't know how long it took us to get back. It certainly didn't take us 21 days. We went in a direct line. And one of the greatest sights I ever saw was the Golden Gate Bridge when we went under that. And I think I was only there a day or two, and we were shipped back across by train to Chicago and the Great Lakes. And I was separated from the Great Lakes Separation Center in Chicago. And I was there for medical examinations and so on for 3 or 4 days. And my sister was a nurse, and her husband was a doctor. They lived in Chicago. And she drove me home when I was finally discharged, and she drove me home. And when I got to Chicago, I couldn't wait to buy a set of civvies, a shirt and the slacks, and had to get out of that Army gear. So when I came home, we drove up to my parents' house, and my wife knew that I was coming, and she was there with my daughter. And I stepped out of the car, and my daughter was standing by the big tree, and she got behind that big tree, and she said, "You're not my soldier, Daddy." The worst thing I could have done is come home in civvies. I'm telling you, I should have worn my uniform. I never forgot that. You're not my soldier, Daddy.
Did you ever visit or contact any of the families of the men from this area who died in New Guinea?
Not, the only one that I recall is the Fullers, the Fuller family from, I believe they're from Wayland. I ran into them at one of our reunions. They were there as guests or just people watching, and they sorted me out afterward and asked me if I had remembered Steve, and I said, "Oh yes, I remember Steve very well." And I said, "I hauled him out after he had gotten killed." And they were, it was good. They'd never heard how he died and talked to anybody that was there when he died, but that one I did. I never met the family of Dannenberg. He was from Wisconsin. And of course the local guys. My wife started keeping a scrapbook. It's still there up in the table there. That and it's pretty well weather-beaten and dog-eared. The pages are rotting, but they're still. She clipped articles out of the paper about everyone who was killed there until Bushman and those that came back wounded. But it's all in that scrapbook, and it'll be a keepsake that I pass along to my kids. And of course, John Mattel, my cousin, and some of the other guys that their family that had gotten killed over there. Always been in touch with them.
How do you think the time in the South Pacific altered your life?
Well, I grew up fast. I was 19 when I was not yet 20 when we left for Louisiana. I was born in November and we left in October, and I was going to be 20 in November, and I was just a young buck yet, and had some wild oats to sow, I guess, but we grew up fast over there. I look back at it, and a lot of people say, oh, they can't talk about it. And to me, it was an experience that I would never want to do again, and I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. I was so impressed with the whole thing, the way it went, and primarily because I didn't get killed. I came out of it, and I don't know. I guess I carried a Bible with me that was given. I was a member of Pillar Christian 9th Street Christian Reformed Church, and I had a little zipper Bible that I carried with me all the time, and I have that now. And if you've got a supreme being that is looking after you, he sure did take care of me, I'll tell you. There were times that bullets were flying around my feet, and I still don't know why I didn't get hit. At one particular time I came off, I had just talked to my platoon out front in the various foxholes, told them that we were going to have a frontal attack, and it was going to be started, the signal would be a burst of machine gun fire, and that then we were supposed to open up with everything we had, and I had just left the last ones, and I was coming back to my post, which was a bunker, a nice bunker, which I did my sniping out of. And someone with a Tommy gun spotted a Jap, and they let that burst go, and everybody thought that was it, and they started firing, and the Japs started firing back. I was right in a machine gun lane. The grass was all cut off about this high from the bullets, and those bullets were flying around my legs, and you talk about a Dutchman taking big strides. I took about 3 or 4 big leaps, and I dove behind that bunker, and to this day I don't know why. I don't know how they all missed me, but that was the closest one I had, I guess, other than being on the front line, and you didn't know whether you had a bullet with your name on it or not, or whether it was for the guy next to you. So,
how were you received by Holland when you got back?
Great. My only regret is that we weren't able to come back as a unit. All our uniforms on, and marched down the street, marched back to the armory the way we left. We came back one at a time, and just kind of melted back into civilization. Guys would get together at the local pub and drink a few beers and talk about their experiences, because we had all separated pretty much, all went various ways during those 3 years that we were overseas. Landed in April, and I in 42, and left there in June of 45. So it was there were 3 years that passed. Some guys had gone back to the States wounded, and others got reassigned and back to the States, but we were recognized, I'll tell you. And of course, the Guards, to this day, the Holland National Guard means a lot to the people. We've had so many reunions put on by the city and by the Guards themselves, and honored constantly, time and time again. We just had one last Veterans Day, no, VJ Day. That's when it was. We had a get-together here in town. And we were really honored there. And remember, the mayor came up to me at the we had a band concert and fireworks at the Calm Park, which we were at. The mayor came up to me and talked to me. And he said, "I know who you are." He said, "I'm not going to ask you I'm going to ask you how long you were in the service and when you got in," because he knew I got in 1940. And so, and he'd been at several of our reunions, but we've had reunions in the Armory, and it's been an honor. It really has been an honor to me. I don't mind talking about it. I'm proud of it. In fact, I told you I wrote an autobiography of my entire life, and people that have read it said some people have said I couldn't lay it down. I couldn't lay it down. But I do. I have written. I'm a sportsman, primarily fisherman, so I've done some writing for some of the sporting magazines, so I know what journalism is all about.
Is it important to you to stay in touch with other vets?
Oh yes, indeed. I'm kind of the historian for our local Company D and for Cannon Company, the unit that I served in New Guinea with. And I keep track of who's where and who dies, and right now it's down to Bill Sickle and I are the last two of the Holland National Guard that left here in October of 1940 and went to New Guinea. We're the only two left, Bill Sickle and I. And I've been to a lot of military funerals with my friends and buddies. And after one at a reunion we had, and I made a little speech and I said, I've been to some military funerals, and I just hope that none of you guys ever come to my military funeral, because it'll mean I'm the last guy standing. Bill never forgot that.
Yeah, I think he's competing with you for that one.
Yeah, really. Yeah, Bill is quite a young-looking guy too. Well preserved.
Well preserved.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, sir.
Good.
Your name and date of birth again.
Okay, my name is Gordon Zuverink. I was born November 9, 1920.
Very good. Okay, my name's Anita Van Til, and the interview date is August 5th, I believe.
I believe
4th.
4th.
Sorry. 2006 in this Grand Valley State University. That's in there too. Cover all the legal stuff of it. Explain the send-off that Holland gave for the Company D.
Well, that was rather eventful. We left in the evening and marched down the steps from the Armory, and it was about a 3-block tour to the depot, where we marched downtown, down Main Street, and crowds lined the street like it was tulip time. There were many, many people down there, and then they all congregated at the depot where we met the train that had come from Muskegon.
The train had already picked up?
Train had picked up company from Muskegon and Grand Haven, I believe, and then they were to pick up our company, Company D.
Do you remember anything that kind of stands out to you that maybe your mother or father or an older figure in your life had said before you left?
I don't remember saying goodbye to my parents. I had a girlfriend that was not there that day. She was in a nanny in Illinois, and she intentionally went with them so that she wouldn't have to be there to say goodbye to me. But some of the other guys' girlfriends were all there, and they were hoisting them up to the windows in the train, and I've got a picture of that, but my girlfriend was over in Illinois.
picking up everybody. How did it feel? Was this just a trip that you were going on, or did you see any serious part of it as of yet?
Well, I thought it was rather eventful to look forward to because young kid at those days, I was, I guess, 19 years old, and I don't know if I was ever out of the state of Michigan. I had taken a few trips with my buddies and my old rattle trap of a car, but we were going to go to Louisiana, and that was a long way away. And if I had been out of the state of Michigan, I don't know where it would have been. It might have been Indiana, but I doubt it. So it was quite an event for me.
I'm going to sort of skip right on over into Australia, just because
Okay.
we have a lot of footage of
Of the trip over.
the trip over on the ship. Unless there's anything that really stands out that you think we should know about.
Well, there was one occasion on the trip over when we boarded the Lure line in San Francisco, but we had been out for 3 or 4 days heading southwest, and there was some talk that speculation we were going to Hawaii, which would have been nice, and suddenly for a matter of 2 or 3 days we headed straight east, and you could tell because of this where the sun came up, and I thought that was rather unusual. I thought maybe the war had been canceled because of lack of interest or something. But no, we had to avoid it seemed we had to avoid a large Japanese convoy that was trying to head us off. So that was the main feature.
How did you and the other Holland guardsmen from Holland remain bonded during training in Australia? And how did you pass your time?
Well, of course, we were in a makeshift camp there, but days, of course, were spent drilling, but nights some of us would chase off to the nearest town, which was Gawler, and of course we headed for the nearest pub and get in there and drink some beer and some wine. We did play a little softball and play cards, of course, in the evening. But our schedule was pretty tight because we were on a tight training schedule, knowing that we wouldn't have a long time to get prepared for where we were going to go.
Did you go by boat over to Port Moresby, or?
Yes, we went by Liberty ship. We landed in Adelaide, which was way in southern Australia, and sometime after that we were put on a troop train and headed for taken through the outback to Brisbane, and we left the Brisbane port on board a Liberty ship to go to Port Moresby, New Guinea.
If you remember back, what was the sense as you were approaching Port Moresby on board the Liberty boat? Was there sort of a sense of fear amongst everybody, or was it sort of just like shock?
Well, when we were heading into the port there, this was our first signs of war. There was that there was a war going on. There was a ship that had been sunken in the harbor, and it was right next to where we docked. So the reality of it all of a sudden came into our minds that we were here.
Were the Japanese bombing Port Moresby when you arrived, or was it pretty quiet still?
No, they were not. There were no signs of the Japanese in Port Moresby while we were there. Of course, they had been bombing there because they'd bombed that ship, but there wasn't much sign of any demolition by bombs in Port Moresby. We saw occasionally we'd see a Japanese bomber way up high in the evening, not zeroed on Port Moresby. I don't know where they were going. So we didn't see much of the war in Port Moresby.
And explain how long of a time from when you left Port Moresby before you started on the trail. Were you in Port Moresby for a few days? Or?
Well, my company and the 2nd Battalion who marched over the Owen Stanley with us, we were only there for a few days, as I recall. And the rest of the unit stayed there, but we were put aboard trucks, and all of a sudden we started heading in a southerly direction somewhere. They didn't tell us where we were going, but we found out when we got there that the trucks got to the end of the roadway, which was the start of the Kappa Trail. There was a village there. I had forgotten the name of the village, but that's where the Kappa Trail started. It was a little-known trail and not heavily used. The main trail in New Guinea was the Casualty Trail. That's where all the fighting had taken place between the Australians and the Japanese. When the Japanese were trying to fight their way from Buna, from the other side of New Guinea, they went over the Casualty Trail. So this Kappa Trail, I guess we took it because it was a kind of a secretive trail, and they didn't think we'd encounter any Japanese there. I was happy for that.
So you didn't encounter any Japanese while?
No, we didn't. No, but he did at one time. After several days out, we met an little Aussie patrol come back. They were carrying a stretcher with a wounded Australian on it, and so they had apparently come off a side trail to get on the Kappa Trail, so they could get back to Port Moresby. And I know the one guy, when they ran into us, of course, we were the forward echelon, and I'll never forget, he said, "Give 'em hell, Yanks." So they were apparently happy to see us coming.
Yeah. When you got on the Kappa Trail, how did you get orders, and did you understand the reasoning behind where you were put and why?
Well, we couldn't figure out why we were walking up that trail. We assumed that we knew the main trail was to the north of us, and we kind of assumed that we were supposed to go inland quite a ways and try to get behind the Japanese and cut them off from their supplies. Well, apparently that didn't happen because about as fast as we walked, the Aussies kept pushing the Japanese back. So we met at Buna on the other side of Papua. And I can't believe that they thought that they would walk us all the way from Port Moresby to Buna, which was 125 miles as the crow flies. I mean, that would be kind of stupid, I thought. But it happened. It took a long time.
How long did it take from the moment that you started on the trail to the moment you got down into Buna?
It's documented that the main force got to Buna 42 days after we started. But I got there just a few days later because I was first in the forward echelon, and then when we got over the Owen Stanley Mountains to the other side of the ridge, I had been a supply sergeant, so my company commander left me in charge of the dropping area. That's where we got our food. And so then I had to stay there. I and a few other guys from my outfit had to stay there until the entire 2nd Battalion came through and picked up their supplies. That's how we got our supplies, just by airdrop. So after everyone was through, and we had a 2-man radio crew with us too from the Signal Corps, and that's how we kept in touch with headquarters. And these two guys would give us the information that they got from headquarters and relay our information back to them. So they're the ones that gave us the orders through the Signal Corps that we were to pack up everything, get some natives together to carry the supplies and head down the trail for Buna.
What
Well, I guess when we crossed over the top, that's the rainforest, and it was raining all the time. For I think it was about 2 days that we were on top of that in the rainforest, and it was mud and roots, and that's where our clothing and equipment and shoes took a royal beating. Some of the guys coming down the other side in the mud, the heels would come off their shoes, and we had no shoe replacements, so they had to wear them as they were. We, if you'd like to a change of socks, you better have them in your backpack. That's the only way you could get them. As I recall, I wore the same clothes all the way over for 50 days or however long I was on the trail. That's a long time to wear some underwear. We washed it out in the rivers and streams when we'd get to it, but lived like animals.
What noise at night when you were on the trail made you the most nervous?
Noise?
Was there any noise?
Lack of noise. It's just a few night sounds, but it was eerily quiet and clear. After the rain stopped, when the sun went down, the sky was just bright with stars, and I believe the moon. Yeah, the moon was up. I remember that.
As you came down off the trail and entered into Buna, what did it look like to you, that first sight of Buna?
Well, there wasn't much to see. It's jungle, and on either side of the trail is what we call kunai grass, and grows 6 feet tall, so you didn't see much. You came by other companies or through the headquarters and so on, but the other companies were all stationed along the front line at that point. In fact, my company was already on a listening post on the front line, and that's where I joined them after we brought our native train and supplies back down.
In your last interview, you said, you told me a story about your first real encounter with a Japanese soldier at San Diego roadblock.
Yeah, that was what we called the listening post. We were quite near the Huggins roadblock. That unit had forced their way through the Japanese line and established a roadblock. Well, that left the trail back to headquarters open, so we were stationed along that trail to try to keep the Japanese from cutting off that roadblock. And we were stationed 2 guys at a post along that trail. And one evening, there was a big log right by our foxhole, and that extended out into the jungle, and I had just sat on that and unaware that there might be some Japs around. I had just finished eating a can of corn mutton and licking my chops, and I heard something off to my right, and it rustling in the jungle, and as I looked over there, I saw this Jap, a lone Jap, crawled over the end of that log that I was sitting on, and I didn't dare to move because I didn't know whether he saw me or not. Well, he did see me, and he jumped behind the bush right next to that log. And so I pulled up my gun and fired into that bush, and he let out a yelp, and he came back across the log, dragging his leg. I must have got him in the hind end or the hip or somewhere. And then I put another bead on him. I said, "Now I got you." And I had him in my sights, and I pulled the trigger, and it said, click. The gun had jammed, so I had no round available. And the guy with me, I said, shoot him. And he couldn't see him. Where? Oh, I'm telling you, that drove me crazy. And that was my first encounter. And I guess that's one of the longest nights I spent on the front line. I just couldn't get that Jap out of my mind. And I was afraid that if he heard that click, that we might have gone to hand-to-hand combat. Well, I wouldn't have been afraid of that. I think I'm sure I was bigger than he is, according to the little Japs I saw. But that night, I laid there and watched, and overly cautious, and the sun was shining through the jungle trees and the leaves, and those leaves made those shadows made forms on the ground, and I imagined the whole Japanese army came right through my post that night. I knew it was my mind, but I couldn't stop it all night long. I watched the whole Japanese army cross my post. Yeah, I was. There's one scared Dutchman.
This is another question that we covered before, but I'm going to ask it again. Explain what illnesses you had when you came back to Australia after Buna and St. Linda, and what kind of treatments they had for those.
Well, we all had to take quinine and then Ativan on the front line because most of us were bitten by the Anopheles mosquito, which carried the malaria. But this would hold the fever down, so you didn't know, you were sick, but you didn't know it. But we had malaria, jungle rot, sores on our legs where we hadn't washed properly, and I had jungle rot all up both my legs, up this side and down the other left leg. I had malaria, and I had black water fever, which was an extended form of malaria, as I understand it. And I was told afterward that's 95% fatal. And in fact, I was approached by a gold mining company to stay in Australia and work for them because once I had black water fever, I was immune to it and I could work on the gold mines in New Guinea, which I turned down, of course. But I had two types of worms in my abdomen, hookworm and whipworm. So when I rejoined my unit, my unit left me. I think I tell you that last time that when we were relieved in the first part of January, first, second, or third of January, we were relieved by, I'm not sure who it was, another division, and our first sergeant gathered us together and he said, we're going back to Australia. But he said, I got to have 2 volunteers to stay on the front line with our replacements, to acquaint them with what is going on the front line, to what we know about it. Well, this dummy, I said, I'll stay if Harry Glatt stays. Harry and I were 2 buddies that hiked it together all the time. Harry said, I'll stay with you. So we back on the front line again. And so I was, we were there probably somewhere between 10 days and 2 weeks, as I recall, because one day I passed out with the black water fever and they carried me off the front line, and I don't know the exact date. But then I was flown back to Port Moresby to the field hospital there. And my unit, of course, was back in Brisbane already. So then I stayed in the hospital there for, probably a week. And then flown back to the mainland and brought back to my company again.
Can you go over what type of equipment that you had with you while on New Guinea? What type of guns or
Yeah, we had.
equipment that they gave you?
Yeah, we were issued the M1 rifle, which was relatively new at that time. I guess it came to being just about the time the war started, because we had old Springfield rifles before that they used in World War I. But the M1 fired a lot faster rounds. The Springfield rifle, you had a cock every time you wanted to shoot, but this was automatic, had automatic clip. Those officers that didn't carry rifles carried a 45 automatic sidearm. We had hand grenades and bayonets, of course, for our gun. when we left Port Moresby, we're all issued gas masks, of course. And by the time we got to Port Moresby, the gas masks were all way on the other side of the mountain. That's the first thing we dumped. We didn't think we'd need gas masks there, so fortunately we didn't. But that was excess equipment. And we had a backpack, of course. Backpack was made up of what do we call a shelter half. That's a half a pup tent. And when you made camp at night, you had to team up with a buddy to put your shelter half together and make a little pup tent. We weren't issued knives, just the bayonets, of course, for hand-to-hand combat. That was about the extent of our equipment. We had mortars, but those we didn't carry over the mountain. They were too heavy. And we had machine guns, which were too heavy. We didn't carry those over, that I recall.
So basically just light arms.
Yeah, just go light on arms. Mm-hmm.
In Buna, was there, explain how the fighting worked. Was there seemed to be a systemized front line?
Well, not really. We, being jungle, we didn't know what was to the left or the right of us, but we were told that maybe C Company might be on our left and A Company on our right, and we changed positions from time to time because occasionally we'd have frontal attacks, take off screaming like banshees and push the Japanese back and establish new positions. And I saw afterward in the documents that I got that it was kind of a semicircle around Buna. They call it a perimeter, and little holes in the line here and there that our units were able to break through and eventually got to the ocean on either side. So then the Japanese literally had their backs to the ocean, and when they finally pushed them out of Buna, there was no place to go if they wanted to run away. They had jumped in the sea, jumped in the ocean. Some of them drowned in the ocean. I was carried out I think it was 3 days before the final push on Buna, so I was already carried out at that time. But I'd read a lot of war materials on how that all transpired. And it showed diagrams in that book of where all the companies were. I saw where we were and where we moved to, and at times we were fighting side by side with the Australians. Heck of a fighters, I'll tell you. Boy, those guys were real nasty. I'm glad they were on our side.
Yeah, we've heard lots of stories about the Australians.
Oh, yeah.
They're crazy.
They were,
high tea.
oh, yeah, they were tough. They were tough.
Some of the other guys that had interviews talked about Japanese POWs if they came in.
I never saw one.
You never saw one.
Take no prisoners. I didn't have the opportunity to take any prisoners, but there were prisoners taken. I didn't let them get that close. I'd shoot first.
Now, when you came back to Australia and after you recovered as much as possible in the hospital there, you said you went on to become a military police.
Oh, yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I came back to my unit, and I assumed my job again as supply sergeant, and I'd be there for a few days, and I'd get the fever, and back to the field hospital, and they'd pour me full of Adabrin and knock the fever down and go back to the company. I think that happened about 3 times. Finally, they gave up. I thought, this guy can't go back into combat again, so I was declared unfit for combat duty and sent to the 118th General Hospital, which was in Sydney. And I spent 9 months there, trying to get rid of the worms and the jungle rot, and it took a long time to get that all out of my system. Finally, I was declared fit enough for duty again, so I was sent to the rehabilitation center. And then I was assigned to the 799th Military Police. And that was and we were in charge of a stockade. That's a prison for Americans, not POWs. Bad boys. Guys that went AWOL and deserted, and we would keep them incarcerated and then eventually send them back to the unit. Except in the cases of guys that were really bad and deserters, we would send those to Brisbane, a prison they called the Round Mountain. That was for the real bad guys that they intended to keep incarcerated until they sent them back to the States.
So would you say there, from your experiences on the 799, was there quite a few that came through over and over again as AWOL? And what were their reasons? Did they ever tell you why they went AWOL?
Oh, the guys in the stockade? Yeah. Well, they just got sick of the front line and took off from their unit. And their unit, AWOL is usually, their units are close by, and they just run to town and without a pass and stay for a few nights, maybe find a girl to live with for a couple of days and come back to the company again. But deserters had no intention of going back. And we did get a few of those. And they figured they'd just get away from the war. We had a couple of them that we killed in the stockade that tried to escape. We had several of them tried to escape, and we'd always get them back. But two of them, I remember, they were climbing the fence, told to halt, and they had tried it before, and two of them were shot in the back and killed climbing the fence. So it was serious.
Explain how you came, or how you were released from duty in Australia and came back to the U.S. How did that system come around? I know we said before something about rotation points.
Right. You had to establish rotation points, how long you were gone from the States, how long you were overseas, and you got double time for combat area. And so I forgot, you had to be up in 100 and some points to when your name would come up for rotation. Well, I know that guys were leaving that had less points than I, and I tried everything to get out of there. And my commanding officer wouldn't let me go. I was in charge of supply there, and he kept telling me, I gotta have you as my supply sergeant. I said, why? You could give this job to a trustee. He could do that job. No, he said, and the stockades were subject to inspection. And he said, I always get good inspections, and I think you're part of that. So he held me a couple of months later. In fact, I even applied to go back to my unit that was island hopping at that time. He wouldn't let me go. He said, you're unfit for combat duty. You're not going. So, but it was a long wait. And finally, I guess, probably in May, I was told that, okay, I could go. I had more than enough points to go back home. And so they shipped me. I guess I went by train back to Brisbane, and that's where I picked up the boat to go back. And strangely enough, in 1942, when we came over, we came over on the USS Lurline, which is a converted pleasure boat, and I got the same boat back to San Francisco again. And one of the nicest sights I've seen that I can remember in my life is seeing the Golden Gate Bridge when we crossed under that bridge. In fact, when we left San Francisco, I had heard that if you throw a penny under the Golden Gate Bridge, it'll be good luck. Well, I guess it was good luck because I didn't find the penny back, but I knew it was down there, and I did get back, all in one piece.
sort of a few people here and there that were dropped off, basically. You couldn't come back as a company.
Oh, no, we came back as individuals. You know, that's the thing that I was always disappointed in, that Company D couldn't come back to Holland as what's left of the unit and march down the street and go back to the Armory. We came back single file, and you go downtown or stop at the local pub, and oh, so-and-so, hey, he's back, you know, and that's the way you congregated again. You ran into the people that were back, and some of them, when they came back, were sent for R&R to Florida and spent some time on the beaches there. I didn't get that. I came back too late, and I was discharged as soon as I got back to Chicago, Great Lakes Training Center.
You had a daughter, or your daughter was born where you were in Fort Moresby.
Right.
Starting up the trail. What was that like the first time that you got to meet her?
Well, my wife and I were married down in Louisiana in the summer of 41, before war was declared. She came down to Alexandria, and we got married down there. And when I left, she was pregnant when we left in February or whenever it was. We went to Fort Devens. We went to Fort Devens first, incidentally. So I didn't. It's strange how I found out that I was a father when we were walking over the Owen Stanley Mountains. On some dropping areas, we would spend an extra day to rest up. And at one of these spots, the planes came over and dropped some supplies, and also dropped a bag of mail. And in that mail, there was a V-mail for me from my mother-in-law that I was the father of a baby girl born on September 12. And as I recall, that was my birthday, November 9, that I got that V-mail. And my daughter, Callie, the one, she still has that V-mail at home. So that was really an airmail. It really came by air.
Nice birthday present too, right?
Yeah, and then of course, going home, when I left Great Lakes Separation Center in Chicago, my sister lived in Chicago. She was married to a doctor there, and she drove me home back to Holland. And of course, when I was in Chicago, I couldn't wait to get into civvies, so I bought a shirt and a pair of slacks, and I wore that home. And when I got out of the car, my wife and daughter were there, and my daughter saw us getting out of the car, and she got behind a big tree in the yard, and she peeked around the tree. She said, "You're not my soldier, Daddy." And that was a bad mistake. I should have worn my uniform home. But I was so anxious to get into civvies.
So what was the first thing you did after you came home and got reacquainted with your family? Did you find a job right away, or?
Yeah, we did get some subsistence pay after we were discharged. Not a heck of a lot, but I did find a job with a moving company, moving furniture, the local moving company. But I had intended to go to school on the GI Bill, and I always excelled in high school on math. That was math and gym were my two favorite subjects, and so I always wanted to use math. And I was going to go to Grand Rapids Junior College and take up accounting. And just before I applied, my dad told me, I had worked as a carpenter prior to the war on my dad's construction crew. So my dad said, "Jim wants to talk to you, Gord." He said, it was my old boss. He started the lumber company up again. So I went over and talked to him, and he said, "I've got a job for you." He said, "I want you to come here and draw plans." I said, "I don't know how to draw plans. I know how to build a house." But he said, "You will learn." He said, I've got a job for you. I want you to start working for us. But you can go to Chicago Technical College and take a 2-year course and take up drafting, and a side course will be building construction, of course. And you can learn as fast as you want in that college. So I started in September, and my wife went along with me, and she worked Baby Bliss Manufacturing Company, putting baby carriages together while I went to school. And went to school during the day, and I studied all night. And that was in September. And in February, I finished my 2-year course and graduated and went home. And I got home, and my boss said, "Here's your office." So I started, and that was a nice shortcut to a good job, and it turned out very well. I stayed in the building business, lumber and building business, all my life.
So when you got back to Holland and you met up with some of the other people from your company that had been over there, what was that like to be back in normalcy, if you will, with everybody?
Well, we, of course, all had a touch base and tell our war stories of where we'd been and what we'd done, and because very few of us were together. I had one person with me in Australia, one of my friends worked with me. But we'd gather often at the local watering hole, which happened to be the Pioneer Club, and drink a beer or two and talk about our war stories. And every so often another one would come along. Here's so-and-so got back. Joe got back. And another big celebration again. And of course, that was before the end of the Japanese War. And so some of our guys were still over there fighting. None of our originals, because most of them were casualties, either killed or wounded or taken off the front line from illnesses. But they eventually, all those survivors staggered back into Holland, and until we all eventually landed a job where we had to go our own way and settle down. And some then, most of them, of course, got married then and settled down and started to get into the real world.
You don't have to answer this one, but can you, if you feel you don't want to, but can you name some of the people that were killed in Guinea that you were friends with before you left?
Oh, yeah, sure. George Broersma was killed by a sniper. Bob Dannenberg, killed by a sniper. I was a platoon officer on the front line, because we don't need supply sergeants on the front line. So I was a platoon officer, and Sergeant Dannenberg was a platoon officer. And Steve Fuller was a platoon sergeant. Both of those guys were killed. There were 3 platoons. I'm the only one that survived out of the 3. I carried them both off the front line. Took to haul their bodies back. George Broersma, Paul Hannigan, Henry Weirmeyer. Trying to think of the clippings that I have in the book that my wife kept. Every time one of the local soldiers would get killed, his picture would be in the paper, and she'd clip it out and put it in the photo album that we had. And Sullivan, Jimmy Sullivan. Those are the only ones that come to my mind right now. Robert John, another one. Yeah.
These were all people that you knew before you
Oh, yeah, we were all buddies. Yeah.
So how often does the Red Arrow still meet?
once a year. We have a Red Arrow Division in September. They have the annual reunion. There's one coming up next. That'll be in Wisconsin. It alternates back from between Wisconsin and Michigan because that's where the guards were from on the Red Arrow Division, Wisconsin and Michigan. So it's usually after Labor Day, have a big reunion, and getting smaller right along because guys are dropping off at the rate of 1,000 a day and 30,000 a month. I don't know how they can be dying that fast because there's not that many left. In fact, the original guys that left Holland in October 1940 in the National Guard and ultimately went to New Guinea, there are only two of us left, Bill Sickle and I. We're the last guys standing.
Do you have anything that you would like to add before we shut that off?
Well, talking about Bill and I, the last time we had a get-together with Company D, that summer I had gone to a couple of my buddies' military funerals, and I told them, the guys, about that, and I said, I hope none of you ever come to my funeral, because that means I'll be the last one. It's coming to pass, I guess.